I've read way too many books about behavior change. Someone really should check me into a mental institution. I mean, they're not all the same, right? Now, my favorite that I've read is not Atomic Habits and it's not The Power of Habit. Instead, it is a tiny book. It offers a fresh take that even our worst habits are not self-sabotage, but rather misguided attempts at self-love. Now we know how it goes. All of our habits at its core start as a way to avoid what we're currently feeling. But as that habit becomes more entrenched, the habit itself becomes a problem. And soon, the habit is a bigger problem than what we were trying to avoid in the first place. Maybe we've tried the game of whack-a-mole, trying to identify our triggers, or used willpower to muscle our way out of those urges. But there's an easier way to quit even our worst habits and scrape back that time to do what we really want to do, which for me is writing. Now the book is The Little Book of Big Changes, and what it might lack in stature, it makes up for in the mental models that it produces, which helped me quit one of my worst habits, using zero willpower. Speaking of which, many books, videos, and pseudo-helpful advice cite willpower as the tool that we should use. Now, to a certain extent, this works. Sit still, lock ourselves up, and don't do the thing. Most of the time, we won't do the thing. But it requires a lot of effort, and sometimes we just can't be bothered, and then we will do the thing and fall right back into that death spiral. But at its core, using willpower is fundamentally wrong. Employing willpower is attempting to think a way out of our problem that is thought-based to start off with. And the main reason we tend to jump from bad habit to bad habit is because we're employing willpower and we haven't properly learned to deal with the urges that we get for our bad habits. Now, one of the first points that she makes in this book is that willpower is unnecessary to overcome urges because our urges have no power. Now, what do you mean, Wilson? When I have an urge, I feel like I'm gonna die. Let's talk about the most helpful mental model that this book presents. Now, Dr. Johnson, Doc J, splits the brain into two distinct categories, our higher brain and our lower brain. Now, our higher brain is intelligent, rational, and logical. This is the part of the brain where conscious decisions are made. Now, we would never voluntarily choose to act on an urge, particularly if we know that it's not beneficial for us, and something that we actively don't want to do. Now, the reason we do it anyway is because this part of our brain is getting hijacked by the primitive part of our brain, the lower brain. As the author calls it, and I absolutely love this, our inner lizard. Now, the lower part of our brain is the complete opposite of the higher brain. It is unintelligent, it has no logic, and is habitual. The main job of this part of our brain is to keep us alive. And when we have a deeply ingrained habit, this part of the brain treats it as if it is a part of our survival. That's why the pull feels so strong. Now, the key thing that she presents is the fact that these urges come from our lower brain. But this lower brain isn't you. You, the conscious thoughts, are our higher brain. Our lower brain is just a routine-based mechanism that is trying to help us out. It may feel like it is us, but it is just our inner lizard. These urges are just passing thoughts. At best, they are meant to be helpful pieces of advice. Hey, if you're feeling bad, maybe you should do this thing which you've done in the past, which helped. Our inner lizard is just trying to help us. Now, sometimes this is also referred to as our addictive voice, which can be helpful. You could call it whatever you want as long as you are not calling it you. Inner lizard, subconscious, addictive voice. It doesn't matter. Now, lucky for us, the lower brain can only issue commands. It can't force us into action. So in essence, though it may not feel like it, we're presented with a choice. When presented with an urge, we can choose not to act on them. Your thoughts alone can't force you to light a cigarette. All of these subconscious urges are then passed to our higher brain, where we have to make a conscious decision to follow it or not. In the book, she presents a really nice framing of this. So let's say you are driving a car. To paint the picture, let's say it's a Ferrari F40 in Verde Apatone. Now you're driving along and you see in the distance a stoplight. So you start to slow down slightly. But then the person in the passenger seat starts to whisper something. Run it, run it. And when you get closer, they start to yell, run it, go through the light. Now, as long as you are the person in the driver's seat, it doesn't matter how loud the person in the passenger seat yells, They can't make you run that light. Your lizard brain is that annoying person in the passenger seat. All it can do is issue urges. Your habits stay alive because you act on urges. If you don't act on them, eventually they'll go away. Easier said than done, because urges are unbelievably uncomfortable. If it was just as easy as don't give in, none of us would have any bad habits. Now, the way presented in this book to go about changing this is to start looking at our urges as impersonal and meaningless. One of my favorite quotes about habits generally comes from Alan Carr's book, The Easy Way to Quit Smoking. And he says that most people start smoking as a form of relaxation. But a large portion of that relaxation and pleasant feelings that comes from our habit is the release of tension created by the urge. Meaning, if there was no urge present, then there's nothing to relax from. So when we get an urge, this can actually be a helpful warning sign. What are you feeling that you're trying to avoid? They give us a chance to slow down and become suspicious of the way we're using our power of thinking. I love this analogy that she poses. Think of your urges like an alarm clock. Your alarm clock is an unintelligent, non-thinking machine. If I set an alarm for 6 a.m., it will go off at 6 a.m. Doesn't matter if I went to bed at 5:30 or if I meant to set the alarm for 6 p.m., it will still go off at 6 a.m. The alarm clock does what it's told. Urges are your mental alarm clock. Loud and startling, yes. Harmful and dangerous, no. Okay, Wilson, this is great and all. My urges aren't me. The difference between the higher and the lower brain, but what do I do about it? Now, the belief that we hold that urges are meaningful and powerful and can only go away when we act on them can be changed through structured pauses. Simply pausing before we act. Now, a pause can look different for everybody. You can go for a walk, call somebody, take a nap. Really doesn't matter as long as we are lengthening the time between when we get an urge and when we are acting on the urge. Your habit changes when your thinking changes. We all know this feeling. We're about to act on an urge, our brain is screaming at us to do the thing, but then there's a little voice in the back of your head saying things like, maybe we shouldn't do this, didn't you say you were gonna stop doing this? A structured pause can help increase the volume of that voice, because that voice is our conscious thought. We just need to embolden the real us, the higher brain, and allow those thoughts to come through more clearly. Implement a pause, or what she calls in the book a choice point, whereby when we're feeling an urge, hold off long enough to realize that we have a choice. You can wait until the thought leaves because it's meaningless and powerless, or we can take action on it. Now, this might sound trivial, but the more we can recognize this space, the larger it will get and the higher the likelihood that we will not act on the urge. Now remember, you've never been permanently stuck in a thought or an emotion. They all go away eventually. Meaning, no matter how strong that urge is, eventually it will go away. Even though it may feel like the only way to get rid of the urge is to act on it. Now, let me be clear, I am not saying to ignore the urges. That would be using willpower. Instead, we want to learn how to dismiss the urge as something that we don't want to do, because we don't have to do it. Dismissing and ignoring are two polar opposites. One requires understanding and one requires willpower. The faster that we can recognize these urges as coming from our lower brain, as impersonal, meaningless, and powerless, the more likely we will be able to dismiss them. One thing that is absolutely critical. Once you've seen urges in a new light, your inner lizard is losing its power, and you're becoming increasingly more habit-free, it is the rule more often than the exception that you will have a setback. Let me say this again. Falling back into habitual behavior is the rule, not the exception, and it means absolutely nothing. It does not mean that it's too good to be true and it's impossible to break this habit. This analogy is used often, but I love it. You regularly go for walks in the woods and you stumble upon a new path. Maybe some deer had gone down it a few times and you can barely see the path, so you decide to walk on it. After the first time walking on it, it's only slightly more clear. But each time you walk on it, it becomes more pronounced and more pronounced. And after weeks, months, and years, it becomes the path of least resistance. It is a well-trodden path that we know well, It's only fair that when we're trying to change paths onto a new one, that we will stumble back into this easy path. The grass won't regrow in a day. Just as we are now trying to view our urges as unimportant and meaningless, we also need to view the thoughts about this relapse in the same way. The only reason we view one instance of this habit as important and meaningful is because we made it important and meaningful. It doesn't have to be. We innocently taught ourselves to build up this habit, but now we know the way out. The same thing happens if you have a setback, you know what to do. Thanks for watching. Beep.